Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to be talking a little bit about contributing on the multiple DNN community projects on GitHub. My name is Daniel Varadas. You have my email on the screen if you ever need to reach me for any reason. I've been using DNN since about version 4. I've developed a lot of custom modules and a lot of custom skins. I'm a DNN MVP, member of the Awareness, Developer, and Technology ecosystems. And we'll start this video with the requirements that the tools we're gonna need in order to work with the DNN projects. So the first thing we'll need is to enable IIS in Windows, which is Internet Information Services. We'll also need SQL Server on the development machine. We'll need Visual Studio with GitHub tools. And we'll need a nice code editor. If you have a preference, by all means go with what you're used to. If you don't, I highly suggest Visual Studio Code. It's lightweight, it's cross-platform, and there's a lot of extensions for it. There's a lot of active development, and it's becoming more and more popular as a text editor for all kinds of purposes. Why we need a text editor on top of Visual Studio? We don't absolutely need it, but sometimes it's a better options and it has better extensions for some specific tasks. So it's still a nice thing to have, but it's not really required. Any text editor like Visual Studio or Notepad or any text editor would do the same job. And we'll also need basic GitHub knowledge. And if we're gonna touch the persona bar or any SPA modules, then on top of all that we're gonna need to have Node.js installed and the Yarn package installed globally to be able to build these module types. So let's get started with our first requirement, which is having IIS enabled in Windows. It's very simple. We're simply going to search for Windows features in the Start menu, and we're going to enable Internet Information Services, which is IIS, and we're going to enable all the World Wide Web services. In my actual system, everything is already installed, so you're going to see me working in virtual machines in these windows. They're browser windows, so the address is just for the virtual machine. That's not actually a website. So we're gonna go in the Start menu and we're gonna search for Windows Features, and we're gonna see Turn Windows Features on and off, which you can also go find from the control panel, but search works good. In here is a list of all the optional Windows features that you can enable or disable, and we're gonna scroll to Internet Information Services. We're gonna tick that. Now you notice some items have a regular tick box and some of them have a black square. A black square means that some of the sub items are selected but not all. For instance here, FTP server is not something that we need. If you need it for something else, go for it, but there's various options that you can enable or disable. We need all the World Wide Web services. Maybe not all of them, but there's a lot of them that we need. So we're gonna expand this. We're gonna application development features. You probably wanna go ahead and take everything in here. Don't know when we're gonna need something here for some project, and those are very small things anyway, so better take them all. Common HTTP features, that's very important. HTTP redirection, we need to enable that. WebDAV, I usually don't install it unless I really need it, because that could create a security surface that we don't want to expose. I'm not saying it's unsafe, but if we don't need it. And in Elton Diagnostics, I would grab everything for a developer. This can always be useful. It's not a production machine. Performance features, you definitely want to have both enabled. And in security, I would get basic authentication and digest authentication and URL authorization, Windows authentication, or all of them. You better select too many than too few. We're gonna click OK, and it's gonna start adding those features. That's gonna take a little bit of time, and if for some reason some of the packages are not available locally that you selected, you simply click download and it's gonna get them from Windows Update. I'm gonna hit cancel here. The rest of the installation is just gonna go through, and for me I'm gonna hit cancel because I already have that set up in another virtual machine, another snapshot actually. So I'm just gonna hit cancel, but for you, you would download and let it finish. The next thing we need is Microsoft SQL Server. So I'm gonna go to another virtual machine here. This one already has IIS installed, so I'm gonna go in any browser. By the way, I didn't put it in the video, but I suggest you install Google Chrome for development, because there's a lot of developer plugins available for Chrome. Of course, if you're a developer, you probably want to have the most common ones like Chrome and Edge and Firefox and Safari. In our case, we're just gonna use Chrome, and we're gonna search for Microsoft SQL Server. And the first link you see, that is from Microsoft. That should be good. There we go. So on Microsoft SQL Server website, you're gonna see try now. Don't click that. This is to try the paid editions. We can do everything that we need with the free editions. So we just need to go into downloads, and again you have trials, but that's still trials for paid versions. That's not what we want. We want download free specialized editions. There's two versions. There's SQL Server Express and there's SQL Server Developer. Developer has absolutely all the features of the Enterprise Edition, but it's not meant for any production use, and it's a little bit heavier than the tools we need for DNN development. So I suggest you go with Express. However, if you do need some of those features, it would also work. So I'm gonna go download the Express edition. And that's gonna give us an installer here, which is quite small, but don't get fooled by that. It's gonna still take quite some time once we selected our options. So we're gonna accept the administrator authorization to run the installer. Just for clarity, I'm gonna close the web page. The installer should start any second now. There we go. So we have basic, which can install everything with the defaults. We have custom, which will allow us to select some options, and we have download media, which will only download everything necessary to actually distribute that on a network to have faster installations without downloading on each computer. For us, we're gonna go with custom because basic has some defaults that we don't want, so we're gonna go with custom. I suggest you keep the suggested path just in case. Some software is known to not work properly when you don't install other software in the path that it's suggesting. And now it's gonna acquire a couple of setup files, but it's not everything. It's just basically the custom installer that we're getting here. As you can see, it kind of closed the installer and is reopening the new download, which is the custom installer. Here we go. So you gotta see a lot of options. This was totally rebuilt. The new Microsoft installers are really improved as they show you the most common options first. So that's what we want. So number one, we need SQL Server standalone installation. We're gonna click on this. We're not building a cluster or anything. We just want a standard local installation. What's happening now is that the installer is testing our machine before it's going to ask us any questions. So it's looking at what's installed, what's the available number of CPUs, because there's different licensing if you have a huge server with a lot of cores and all that. So it's doing a couple checks. Everything should be green except maybe the Windows firewall. This is not an error, it's a warning. If we go into the details, what it's telling us, it's the way the firewall is set up right now, people from outside our network cannot connect to the SQL server. And that's actually a good thing. Since it's a developer machine, we don't need that to be public. So if you see a warning on that, just go ahead and go next. And if you have any other errors or warnings, just click on the link. You're going to have some details about why. We want to do a new installation. We don't have anything local yet, so it's a new installation. Then there's a license to accept, so if you want to go ahead and read that and accept it. Now here is the different options that we want with our SQL server, different components. So I suggest leaving the default. It looks fine to me. If you see anything that's interest for you, like polybase query or something, if you want local DB, but the defaults look fine to me. Just go next, and again I suggest you leave the standard paths for all of this. So this page was the features selection. The next page will be the feature rules. And here we're going to select if you want a named instance or the default instance. So you can have more than one SQL instance on the same machine. So if that's the case, you need to name them, or you could have a default one, which is going to be, in this case, MS SQL Server. You can still change the name, but this one will be the default one if a name is not specified when you connect to SQL Server on this machine. We're going to click Next, and our next step will be the server configuration. And in here, there's a couple service accounts that will be created for SQL Server. If you know that you have any special need for that, or collation. If you don't know, leave it as is. If you know a specific need, change it here. Our next screen is the database engine configuration. So here we have to go outside of the defaults. So by default, it's suggesting Windows authentication mode. So that means only people who have a Windows account can log into SQL. We do not want that. We want to have mixed mode, and we want to set a password. This is the system administrator account, which is totally different than your Windows account. It's really specific to SQL. The username is SA. There's no way to change it. You just have to select a password, which should be strong in a production environment. And next. That's the only option. There's other tabs if you want to go look around and you know some specific requirements, but for our purpose, that was the only thing that we need to change from the default basic installation. So there's two more agreements, one for Microsoft R, which I'm not familiar with, and one for Python, which I am also not familiar with, but I decided to install them anyway because They're not a huge impact on performance, and they come with the default selection, so I just left them there. And the product is installing. Now be prepared, this takes quite some time, so thanks to the magic of virtual machine snapshots, I'm going to switch to the next snapshot, which has this already installed. Just as a warning, you see it progressing quite fast, and then it's going to go a bit slower, and at the end it's going to stay at the end for a couple minutes. It's not a bug, it's just the, I don't know, the ratio of the progress bar is kind of strange, and it's gonna look stuck at the end, but leave it a good couple of minutes until it finishes, and you're gonna have a next or close, or it's gonna show the complete screen. Anyway, it's gonna be obvious that the installation is completed. So I'll see you back in a few seconds in another virtual machine which has that already installed. So our SQL Server is now installed, and that is only the server part of it, so we still have nothing to edit the data or create databases, edit tables, unless we use command line. So in order to have a user interface that is graphical, we need to install the SQL Server management tools. There's other available add-ons here, but the SQL Server data tools, we actually gonna have that inside of Visual Studio, and the rest is things that I do not use, but if you have a use for them, like reporting services or other stuff, go ahead and install them from here. For our needs, that's what we need, server management tools. So we're gonna click this, and it's gonna send us to a web page on the Microsoft website where we can download SQL Server Management Studio, often called SSMS. And you want the first one on the link here, not the upgrade package. This is if you already have it and want to upgrade to the latest version. We do not have it, so we want to go ahead with the first one. And that will download a slightly larger installer. And it's very basic. You have an install button and it's going to install. There's no options to select or anything, so this one is a quick one. So now that it's installed, what we're going to see in the start menu is our two items. So SQL Server Profiler, this one is mainly used to troubleshoot performance or bugs that concern the connection between an application and SQL Server. It allows us to inspect what's going on between SQL and the application, kind of a sniffer. We don't use it much unless we're troubleshooting or tweaking performance. What we use most is Microsoft SQL Server Management. I'm gonna open it, and the first time you open it, it takes a little bit longer because it's setting things up. And when it's open, automatically it's gonna have your server name directly in the box. If you have more than one instance, you're gonna have the other instances here. And it's gonna offer you Windows authentication, which will work since you are an administrator on this computer. It's gonna work. If you wanna log in with the SQL login, you can do it too. You go to SQL Server Authentication, the login will be SA, and the password will be what you set during the installation, and you can also tell it to remember your password and connect. But I usually leave it here on Windows Authentication. And on the left you're gonna have your SQL Server, the databases, security, all the SQL objects. We're mainly going to be working in the databases here, so if you want to create a new database, you can go ahead and create it. We'll look at this a bit later when installing DNN, but that's basically the user interface you're going to need to create databases and edit the tables and the data contained in them. which completes the Microsoft SQL Server installation part. Next up, we're going to install Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. The difference between the two, Visual Studio is a full IDE that will allow you to compile C# code with different workloads, and the installer actually mentions those workloads. So you can build Windows applications for desktop, you can build ASP.NET for web development projects. There's various things here that you can do, .NET Core projects. These are the options I suggest that you select. So we want Universal Windows with .NET Desktop, ASP.NET Web Development with Node.js, that we mention a bit later. For some reason, the last time I tried it, Node.js was actually not installed after selecting this option, so we still need to install it manually. I don't know the reason why. Data storage and processing, we had it available in the SQL installation and we skipped it because I mentioned it was available inside of Visual Studio. And we also gonna include mobile development with JavaScript because that's gonna give us code completion for ECMA 6, so JavaScript version 6. That's going to be helpful inside of Visual Studio. .NET Core is more for the future of DNN, so you better have it already installed. And then we're going to add a couple individual components, such as GitHub for Windows and the GitHub extensions for Visual Studio. So one needs the other one. When the installation of that is finished, you're gonna need either to create a free Microsoft account, or if you already have one, just to log in. That's the only condition to use the free version. There's no catch or anything. You just log in, and there's actually a couple services that you get for free in the community edition. So let's dive into this. I have my virtual machine here. Just search for Visual Studio. And the first visualstudio.microsoft.com will have both downloads for Visual Studio IDE and Visual Studio Code. The both, we're gonna need them. So let's start with Visual Studio, and this one, there's different editions. The free one is community, and it's good for what we need it, but if you already have professional or enterprise or need those features, it works too. So once we get on the community, there's a server if you want to fill it. As you see, the installer is very small because it's going to install only the things that we're going to request from it. So the actual wizard has a lot of options, and the main installer is very small. So there's a little configuration that needs to go on. Just press continue. And this is the actual installer. So in the workloads here, we are going to select Windows Universal, .NET Desktop Development. If you need C++, go ahead. We're gonna need ASP.NET. If you need anything else that I'm not selecting, just go ahead. You know what things you work with. We're gonna select Node.js and data storage and processing. If you do any office development, this is good too, if you want it. We're gonna grab the mobile development in order to get our sorry, we're gonna get mobile development with JavaScript. That will allow us to get TypeScript language support. But if you need other stuff, you can grab it here too. And .NET Core cross-platform development, we also want this. So it's about 20 gigs to install. It's gonna take quite some time. In my case, it's already, sorry, you need to go also into individual components. And there's a couple things we're gonna add, which are Git for Windows, GitHub extensions for Visual Studio, if you want to do any type of Android testing and development, you can add that. It's a very nice product. If you need other versions of TypeScript, they're also available. And that's it. So I'm gonna go ahead and you would go ahead and click install at this point, and the installation is gonna take quite some time. I have all that ready, so in my case I'm just gonna close it. The other one we need to install is Visual Studio Code, and if I go back to my slide, in Visual Studio Code we want it allows us to open any file or folder in Visual Studio Code. It's not based on projects and solutions. So that's a nice thing to have when you're just on a folder and you want to go see some code. It's nice. It has an integrated terminal, which you can get with Visual Studio also, but it's built in into Visual Studio Code. It's very useful. And it sometimes have better front-end development tools and extensions for it. It's lightweight and it's cross-platform. So if we just go back on the same page, you have Visual Studio Code. I'm gonna download it, and this installer will ask you nothing. It's just gonna be a very normal click next until it's finished install type. So I'm not gonna even bother going through the installation. I'm just gonna skip ahead to a point where we have them both installed. Now, as I said earlier, there is an issue where even though we selected Node.js in the Visual Studio options, it's not installed. So we need to go grab it, and then we need to run a command which is npm, which is Node Package Manager. That's part of Node, so you need to install Node.js first. So it's going to be npm install space /g for global space yarn. That will install yarn, which is used for front-end development, persona bar, and many SPA module types. The -g means global, which means it's going to be available from any folder, any path. If you don't put the /g, it's going to install it only on the folder where you are when you run that command. And after that, we're going to also add two browser plugins, one for React, one for Redux. And we're going to use that a bit later when we talk about the persona bar, and it would also be used on any other React module. So let's start with Node.js. So the website is nodejs.org, or you can just search for Node.js. And I suggest to take the recommended for most user. It's kind of known a little bit for breaking changes, so if you go with the latest features, sometimes you can run into troubles. So I'd go with the recommended version. This installer is also quite simple. You accept a license agreement. I suggest you keep the default path and the default options. Install. And we're done. So now, if we open a command prompt, you just search for cmd, we should be able to type node -v, which will get us our Node.js version, and that confirms that it is installed. So if Node is installed, we have access to the npm command, which is the Node package manager, and we're gonna install Yarn using the command npm install -g for global and Yarn. Installed, sorry for that. And it's gonna download very small package and install it, and it's installed globally. So now we can do yarn -v and it works. We can change folder and do yarn -v to get the version, and it's working. So we know it's installed globally. And we are done with the boring part. All our tools are installed. The last thing I did here, now that we have all the tools, we kind of put the tools on our tool belt. So I just put in the taskbar the 4 tools that we installed: Visual Studio, which is the purple logo, Visual Studio Code, which is the blue one. We have IIS, or Internet Information Services, and we have SQL Server Management Studio. So that's the 4 tools we installed. I just put them in the dock here, or the taskbar, so they're easy to access and to see what's open and to switch between them.